Abraham, the father of faith, is a central figure in the Bible, renowned for his trust in God. Yet, Abraham's journey was not without its struggles. The Bible faithfully records not only his great acts of faith but also his moments of weakness. These stories reveal that faith is a journey of growth, shaped by trials, failures, and God's unchanging grace. Today, we will examine several key events where Abraham's weaknesses were revealed: the Egypt incident, his relationship with Hagar, and the repeated deception about Sarah. Through these accounts, we will see how God worked through Abraham's imperfections to fulfill his divine plan and how we can learn from them. 1. The Egypt incident, fear and deception. Scripture reference: Genesis 12 to 10:20. When a famine struck the land of Canaan, Abraham and Sarah traveled to Egypt. Fearing for his life because of Sarah's beauty, Abraham asked her to tell the Egyptians she was his sister, not his wife. As a result, Pharaoh took Sarah into his palace and gave Abraham wealth in exchange. However, God intervened, sending plagues on Pharaoh's household, leading to Sarah's release and their safe departure. Lessons from Abraham's weakness: fear over faith. Abraham's decision was driven by fear, not trust in God's protection. His actions endangered Sarah and compromised his integrity. God's intervention: despite Abraham's failure, God's faithfulness remained. He protected Sarah and upheld his promise to Abraham. Application for us: we often act out of fear rather than faith, but God's grace covers our mistakes and leads us back to his plan. 2. The relationship with Hagar, impatience and human plans. Scripture reference: Genesis 16 to 1-16. Years passed after God promised Abraham a son, yet Sarah remained barren. In their impatience, Sarah suggested Abraham take her maidservant Hagar as a surrogate to bear a child. Abraham agreed, and Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. However, this decision led to strife. Hagar despised Sarah, and Sarah mistreated Hagar, creating tension that persisted for generations. Lessons from Abraham's weakness: impatience with God's timing. Abraham and Sarah's attempt to fulfill God's promise through human means revealed their struggle to trust God's timing. Consequences of human plans: their decision brought conflict into their household and affected future generations. God's mercy: despite their mistake, God showed mercy to Hagar and Ishmael, providing for them and blessing Ishmael with a great nation. Application for us: trusting God often requires patience. When we take matters into our own hands, we risk complicating God's plan. Yet, his mercy remains. 3. The Gerar incident, repeated deception. Scripture reference: Genesis 22:1-18. Later in Abraham's life, he repeated the same mistake he made in Egypt. While in Gerar, he again claimed Sarah was his sister to protect himself. King Abimelech took Sarah into his household, but God intervened through a dream, warning Abimelech not to touch her. Once again, Sarah was returned unharmed, and Abraham's integrity was preserved. Lessons from Abraham's weakness. Recurring weakness: even after witnessing God's faithfulness, Abraham's fear led him to repeat his earlier deception. God's faithfulness: God protected Sarah and ensured his promise of a son through her would not be jeopardized. Application for us: we may struggle with the same weaknesses repeatedly, but God remains faithful, teaching and guiding us through our failures. 4. Intercession for Sodom and Gomorrah. Struggles in faith. Scripture reference: Genesis 18:16-33. Although not a failure, Abraham's intercession for Sodom and Gomorrah reveals his uncertainty and humility before God. He repeatedly asked God if he would spare the cities for the sake of fewer and fewer righteous people, displaying both boldness and hesitation in his prayers. Lessons from Abraham's weakness. Human limitation. Abraham's repeated questioning reflects the natural struggle to fully grasp God's justice and mercy. Faith in progress. Despite his hesitance, Abraham's willingness to intercede shows his growing relationship with God. Application for us: we may not always understand God's plans, but he invites us to approach him in prayer with humility and faith. 5. Faith refined through trials. Despite these moments of weakness, Abraham's faith matured over time. The ultimate demonstration of his faith came when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, Genesis 22 1-19. By then Abraham had learned to trust God completely, believing that God could even raise the dead to fulfill his promise. This act of faith solidified Abraham's legacy as the father of faith. Key takeaways: faith grows through failure. Abraham's weaknesses did not disqualify him from God's plan. Instead, they were opportunities for growth. God's grace is greater. Abraham's story demonstrates that God's plans are not thwarted by human imperfection. Hope for us: like Abraham, we can trust that God's faithfulness will sustain us even when we falter. Conclusion: Abraham's life is a testament to the journey of faith, a path marked by both victories and failures. His weaknesses remind us that even the greatest heroes of faith were human, prone to fear and impatience. Yet God's unwavering grace and faithfulness carried Abraham through, shaping him into a man who trusted God wholeheartedly. As we reflect on these stories, may we find encouragement in knowing that God works through our weaknesses to accomplish his purposes. Like Abraham, we are called to grow in faith, trusting that God's promises will never fail.